I'm sitting in my living room this evening, eating a frozen dinner in front of the television like I have every night for the past 4 years, and I keep thinking about the note my wife left on the kitchen counter when she walked out of our marriage in 2020. "Harold," it said, "I can't spend whatever years I have left being invisible in my own home. I hope you find whatever you've been looking for all these years, because it was never me." She was right. After 43 years of marriage, she was absolutely right. I'm Harold and I'm 77 years old. And 4 years ago, my wife Dorothy packed 2 suitcases, loaded her car and drove away from our marriage forever. Not because I cheated or gambled or drank, but because I spent 4 decades treating her like furniture, useful, reliable and completely forgettable. Let me tell you why the best woman I ever knew finally gave up on me and why I had it coming. Dorothy and I met in 1975 when we were both 32 years old. She was working as a secretary at the insurance company, where I'd just been hired as an adjuster, and she was the kind of woman who made everyone's day better just by being there. She remembered everyone's birthdays, kept a jar of peppermints on her desk for anyone who needed one, and had this way of making even the grumpiest clients feel heard and valued. I was immediately attracted to her, but not just because she was pretty, though she was, with auburn hair and green eyes and a smile that made you want to tell her all your problems. What drew me to Dorothy was how competent she was, how effortlessly she managed everything and everyone around her. She was the person people came to when they needed something done right. We started dating in the summer of 1976, and Dorothy made even ordinary activities feel special. She'd pack elaborate picnics for our drives to the lake, find interesting exhibits at the art museum, suggest restaurants I never would have tried on my own. She was curious about everything, enthusiastic about life, and somehow convinced that I was worth all the effort she put into making our time together memorable. We got married in June 1977, and I thought I'd won the lottery. Dorothy made our small apartment feel like a home with plants and good food and music playing softly in the background. She was interested in my work, supportive of my goals, and patient with my moods and quirks in ways that made me feel like a better man than I probably was. Our daughter Amy was born in 1980, and our son Peter came along in 1983. Watching Dorothy with those babies was like watching someone discover her life's purpose. She was endlessly patient, endlessly creative, and had this gift for making even the most chaotic days feel manageable and fun. But somewhere in those early years of marriage and parenthood, I stopped paying attention to Dorothy as a person and started taking her for granted as a system that kept my life running smoothly. She managed our social calendar, our children's schedules, our household budget, and our extended family relationships. She remembered anniversaries and birthdays, planned vacations, and handled all the emotional labor that makes a family function. And I let her. I came home from work every day expecting dinner to be planned, the house to be clean, the children to be supervised, and Dorothy to be available to listen to whatever problems I'd had at the office. I didn't ask about her day, her feelings, her dreams, or her needs. I just assumed that managing our domestic life was her job, the same way managing insurance claims was mine. Dorothy never complained, at least not in ways I bothered to hear. She'd mentioned that she felt isolated staying home with small children, and I'd suggest she join a mother's group without offering to watch the kids so she could actually attend meetings. She'd say she missed working, and I'd remind her how expensive childcare was without considering whether there were other solutions. When she tried to talk to me about books she was reading or articles that interested her, I'd half listen while watching television or reading the paper. When she suggested we needed to spend more time together as a couple, I'd promise we'd plan something soon, then never follow through. I treated Dorothy like an efficient household manager rather than the woman I'd fallen in love with and married. She kept our life organized, and I kept earning money to support it. That seemed like a fair division of labor to me, even though I never asked Dorothy if it seemed fair to her. As the years went by, Dorothy became quieter. She stopped trying to tell me about her day, stopped suggesting activities we could do together, stopped asking for my opinion about decisions that only affected her. She managed the household, raised the children, and created a social life for our family that didn't require much participation from me beyond showing up. I told myself this was what marriage looked like after the honeymoon phase ended. We were comfortable with each other, settled into routines that worked, focused on practical responsibilities rather than romantic gestures. I didn't realize that what I called comfortable Dorothy experienced as lonely. When Amy and Peter were teenagers, Dorothy went back to work part-time at a law office. She loved having adult conversations again, loved feeling competent and valued in a professional environment, loved having her own money to spend without having to justify every purchase to me. I was supportive of Dorothy's return to work, but in the most passive way possible. I didn't adjust my schedule to help with household duties. I didn't take over any of the childcare responsibilities she'd been handling alone. I just expected her to add a job to everything else she was already doing, and she did it because that's who Dorothy was, someone who made things work even when the system was unfair. The kids graduated high school and went to college, and suddenly Dorothy and I were alone together for the first time in decades. I thought this would be a good thing, a chance for us to reconnect and enjoy each other's company without the distractions of active parenting. But we'd spent so many years living parallel lives that we didn't know how to intersect anymore. Dorothy had interests and opinions and dreams that she'd never stopped having, but I'd stopped paying attention to them so long ago that I didn't even know what they were. She'd suggest we take a trip somewhere, and I'd agree in principle, but never help with the planning or show any enthusiasm for her ideas. She'd try to start conversations about things that interested her, and I'd respond with minimal engagement while focusing on my own activities. Dorothy started taking classes at the community college. Literature, art history, psychology courses that fascinated her and gave her outlets for intellectual curiosity that I'd never encouraged or supported. She made friends in these classes, joined book clubs, began volunteering at the library. She was building a life that interested her, and I was barely aware of it happening. I'd ask perfunctory questions about her classes the same way I'd ask about the weather. Polite conversation that didn't require real attention or investment. In 2018, when Dorothy turned 75, she started talking about things she wanted to do with whatever years she had left. She wanted to travel to places we'd never been. She wanted to spend more time with our grandchildren. She wanted to read books and have real conversations about them. She wanted to feel like her thoughts and feelings mattered to someone. I listened to these conversations like she was making suggestions about redecorating the living room. Nice ideas that we might get around to eventually, but nothing urgent or important enough to act on immediately. Dorothy started asking me directly about our relationship. Did I still find her interesting? Did I value her opinions? Did I see her as a person, or just as the woman who managed our household? These questions made me uncomfortable because I'd never thought about our marriage in those terms. I gave her reassuring but vague answers. Of course I valued her. Of course she was important to me. Of course I wanted to spend time with her. But I didn't change any of my behavior, didn't make any effort to demonstrate that these words were true, didn't prioritize her needs or interests or feelings in any meaningful way. The breaking point came in early 2020, during the pandemic lockdown. We were stuck at home together for months, and instead of bringing us closer, it highlighted how little we actually connected as people. I spent my days watching news programs and reading online forums. Dorothy spent hers reading, gardening, and trying to maintain relationships with friends and family through phone calls and video chats. She tried to include me in activities, cooking projects, card games, television shows she thought we could enjoy together. I'd participate minimally, more focused on my own entertainment than on spending quality time with her. One evening in September, Dorothy asked if I was happy with our marriage. Not whether I was happy in general, but specifically whether I was satisfied with our relationship. I gave her a typically thoughtless answer. Of course I was happy. We'd been married for 43 years. We had a nice house and healthy children and no major problems. Dorothy looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before and said, "Harold, when was the last time you asked me a question about something I cared about? When was the last time you showed interest in my thoughts or feelings or dreams? When was the last time you treated me like someone worth knowing instead of just someone who handles the details of your life?" I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. Not because it had been a long time, but because I'd spent decades not seeing Dorothy as a complete person, with her own inner life, her own needs, her own right to feel valued and appreciated by her husband. That conversation was on a Tuesday. On Friday, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find Dorothy loading suitcases into her car. She'd found a small apartment across town, signed a lease, and arranged to have her mail forwarded. She was leaving, and she'd planned it without telling me because she knew I'd try to talk her out of it, without addressing any of the reasons she wanted to go. The note she left was longer than the few sentences I shared earlier. She wrote about 43 years of feeling like a supporting character in her own marriage. She wrote about trying to get my attention, my interest, my genuine affection for decades, and finally accepting that I was never going to see her as anything more than the person who managed our domestic life. She wrote that she loved me, but that loving someone who doesn't really see you is exhausting, and she was too old to spend her remaining years being exhausted by trying to matter to someone who'd proven he didn't think she was worth the effort. I tried everything to get her back. I called constantly, showed up at her apartment, sent flowers, wrote letters promising I'd change, but Dorothy was done in the way people are done when they've spent years trying to fix something that the other person doesn't think is broken. She filed for divorce 6 months later. We'd been married for 43 years, and it ended not with a fight or a betrayal, but with Dorothy finally accepting that I was never going to value her the way she deserved to be valued. The divorce was final in 2021. Dorothy got half of everything, which was fair, and I got the house that felt empty without her in it. Our children supported her decision completely. Amy told me she'd watched me take Mum for granted her whole life and was proud of Mum for finally putting herself first. Peter said he hoped Mum would find someone who appreciated her, since I'd clearly never learned how. Dorothy did find someone, actually. A man named Robert she met in one of her book clubs. He's a widower, a retired teacher, who reads voraciously and travels frequently and treats Dorothy like she's fascinating and wonderful and worth listening to. They got married last year, and Dorothy looks happier in her wedding photos with Robert than she ever looked in 43 years of marriage photos with me. I see them sometimes at community events, and I watch Robert pay attention when Dorothy speaks, ask follow-up questions about things that interest her, include her in conversations like her opinions matter. It's painful to watch, not because I'm jealous, but because I finally understand what Dorothy was asking for all those years and how simple it would have been to give it to her. Here's what I learned too late. Marriage isn't a system where one person manages the emotional labor while the other person earns money and shows up for major events. It's a partnership where both people actively choose to know, value, and prioritize each other every single day. Dorothy didn't leave me because I was a terrible husband. I never cheated, never gambled away our savings, never hit her or abused her in obvious ways. She left me because I spent 4 decades treating her like hired help instead of like the woman I'd chosen to spend my life with. I took her competence for granted instead of appreciating it. I let her manage all the emotional work of our marriage instead of participating in it. I assumed that because she didn't complain loudly or frequently, she didn't have needs that weren't being met. I treated my wife like furniture, useful, reliable, and completely ignorable until something broke or needed replacing. The problem wasn't that Dorothy wasn't interesting. The problem was that I'd stopped being interested in her, stopped seeing her as a person worth knowing, stopped treating her like someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered to me. Dorothy deserved a husband who asked about her day and listened to the answer. She deserved someone who noticed when she was sad or excited or frustrated and cared enough to respond. She deserved a partner who saw marriage as an opportunity to know someone deeply, not just a domestic arrangement that kept life running smoothly. She deserved better than me, and at 77 years old I finally understand that she was right to stop accepting less than she deserved. If you're married and you think your spouse is fine because they're not complaining, if you've stopped asking questions about their inner life because you assume you already know everything important, if you're treating your partner like a service provider instead of like the person you chose to love, let me tell you something I wish I'd understood decades ago. Competent people often suffer in silence until they can't suffer anymore, and by then it's too late to fix what you've broken through neglect. Your spouse doesn't exist to make your life easier. They exist as a complete person with thoughts, feelings, dreams, and needs that are just as important as yours. If you're not actively working to know and value that person, you're not actually married. You're just sharing expenses with someone you've stopped seeing as human. Don't make my mistake. Don't spend 43 years assuming that someone will always be there while never giving them a reason to want to stay. Don't learn what you had only after it's gone forever. If this story makes you think about your own marriage, your own level of attention to your partner's inner life, I hope it motivates you to do better than I did. Share this with someone who might need to remember that marriage requires active participation, not just passive coexistence. And tell me in the comments, what's one thing you could ask your spouse today that would show them you're interested in their thoughts and feelings? Sometimes the simplest questions are the ones that matter most.